Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of the A24 Project. I'm one of your co-hosts, Lee Hudson, and I'm joined as always by Dallas King. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. We've obviously just dropped 3 episodes on day 1 to give you a kind of good flavour of the show, the movies we'll be covering, and plenty to keep you entertained on your bus journeys this week. So if you made it this far, thank you for joining us. And after today, we'll be back in 2 weeks with our next episode where we'll review Under the Skin and Locke. But this week, we'll be discussing the Spectacular Now and Enemy. So Dallas, how do you feel? We're 3 episodes into this show already, and once again, obviously we're recording these kind of 3 episodes kind of maybe a month before they actually drop, so we won't have any kind of news or kind of trailer kind of reaction at this stage, because it will all be out of date. But one of the kind of bits of news that's sort of dropped in the past week is that 8th Grade has been picked up by Sony Pictures for international release, so we are one step closer to having a UK release date. So hopefully by the time this drops, one of my most anticipated films of the year from A24 will have made its way to the UK in terms of a date anyway.
Exactly. It's exciting news, and also means that we've got a better chance of actually reviewing it before that episode comes around.
Absolutely. We've probably got a year or so before we get that far, but at the slow rate it's been going, I wouldn't be surprised if we get there and we have to go insert generic opinions or visit Napster, for example.
If anything, by the time we get to that episode, we'll have about another 20 episodes planned at the rate that A24 are releasing films at the moment, it seems.
I know, it's absolutely crazy and stuff like that. So it's safe to say this podcast is going to keep us as podcasters and you as listeners kind of hopefully gripped for the next few years, or for until we pack it in and die of old age. But I think with the fact that we're going to be discussing another kind of 2 exciting choices of movies today, and I think one of them might potentially be one of our favourite A24 movies to date, is going to be pretty exciting. So we'll dive into this week's movies, the Spectacular Now and Enemy. So the Spectacular Now was picked up by A24 after the Sundance Film Festival, and is directed by James Posseldalt with a script by Scott Neusel-Daitler and Michael H. Weber, the writers of 500 Days of Summer, so that was certainly a selling point for them. And it's the story of Sutter Keeley, played by Miles Teller, who lives in the now, and it's a good place for him. High school senior, charming and self-possessed, he's the life of the party, loves his job at a men's clothing store, and has no plans for the future. A bit of a budding alcoholic, he's never far from this supersized whiskey-fortified Thirstmaster cup. But after being dumped by his girlfriend, played by Brie Larson, Sutter gets drunk and wakes up on the lawn at Amy Finicky, played by Shailene Woodley, who's hovering over him. She's different, she's the nice girl and who reads science fiction but doesn't have a boyfriend. And while Amy has dreams of the future, Sutter lives in the impressive delusion of the spectacular now, yet somehow they are drawn together. And on Rotten Tomatoes, this film has an approval rating of 92% and with an average rating of 7.8 out of 10. So, do you think that deserves that high praise? What was your kind of first reaction when you saw this film?
I think I saw this film about 2 or 3 years ago. It was one that, again, some of these films, for whatever reason, don't seem to get a release in the UK. I don't think it ever actually got a full cinematic release. So I actually ended up getting the DVD off of someone at work, a Region 1 DVD copy, which I've now actually realised, confession to time, that during this podcast, while I was rewatching it, that I still have said DVD. So apologies to that person, and I will make sure I try and get that back to you. But thankfully it made it easier for me to rewatch it. And for me, just as we're in our 3rd episode, we're hopefully getting into our stride. A24 really were getting into their stride and picking up steam with their releases over the last couple of episodes. And this one, for me, if it's maybe not completely spectacular, it is a ruddy good job, because it's a story which has been told before, drinking high school kind of lad about town jock type meets and befriends and then ultimately romances the nerdy sort of high school girl. But it's just a really well told story. I mean, you picked up on earlier on the writers, and I'm not going to attempt to say their names as well, because it's one that you'll always sort of end up tripping over your tongue. But just looking back at their catalogue, with the exception of the Pink Panther 2, they've written some absolutely fantastic stuff. 500 Days of Summer, as you said, but also The Fault in Our Stars, which I saw a Cineworld Unlimited preview, and I've never seen a reaction like that. Not in terms of like whoops and cheers, but the amount of audible weeping at the end of that film was utterly incredible. And they just adapted that movie brilliantly. They also did Paper Towns, The Disaster Artist, another one that we're going to review in the future. Adapting Tommy Wiseau's story to the big screen, and then the other a film which was released on Netflix last year, which was a film which had a bit of a funny thing over in the UK just for the name of the film and for how people in the UK would pronounce it. But Our Souls at Night, which the UK pronounces as Our Souls at Night. But they've got a great back catalogue of filmmaking, and I thought one of the strengths of the film was the believability of the characters. You totally bought into them and their relationships, not only Miles Teller and Shailene Woodley, but also the supporting characters, including Brie Larson as Sutter's ex-girlfriend, and also you've got sort of supporting roles from like Bob Odenkirk from Better Call Saul, and sort of Kyle Chandler was great in the small role as Sutter's estranged father, and Jennifer Jason Leigh as well as his mother. And it's a story that's been told before, but it's just told incredibly well and utterly believable. And yeah, it takes you on a ride, and yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, like this was a film that I wasn't too familiar with. I think had seen sort of it, kind of a trailer or something, or some buzz about it at the time, and it was actually Aggressive Negotiation host Matt Rushing who'd kind of raved about this, and I'm a Letterboxd fiend and stuff like that, and I remembered having a glance at his one day when I started following him on it, and I noticed it was in his top 4 movies, which kind of surprised me because it was such a recent movie as well, and for something like that to kind of be so high on a person's list, it must be something pretty special. So I was curious to check it out, and actually, before I dive in with my opinion, let's hear from Matt Rushing himself, who's recorded some of his own thoughts on why this film's so spectacular in his eyes. So here's Matt Rushing giving his thoughts on The Spectacular Now.
Hey guys, this is Matt Rushing here, and I was so excited that you guys were going to be covering The Spectacular Now, which is actually one of my favorite movies. And honestly, I think one of the reasons that it really stuck with me, and I remember even seeing it for the first time, and I saw it a few times when it was in the theater, and it was always such an affecting film, and it really has to do with the main character and his journey throughout the movie, and being this character who feels very unlovable, and somebody who struggles with that, and because of that kind of acts out in so many different ways. And it's not until that beautiful moment with his mother where she says, it's not your fault and I love you, and he just breaks down, and it's such a gorgeous scene, and it's one that really resonated with me, and it still resonates with me. That idea that we long to be in that position. We long to be known and loved by somebody and cared for in a way. We want somebody to see us for who we really are, accept us, and then use that love to be able to move forward, to find a way to make ourselves the best version of who we can be. And that is just something that is, I think, really, really special. And I'm really appreciative to this movie for that. And again, it's something that I watch every single time, and I see that, and it's just wonderful. So I'm glad that you guys covered this, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have. And then too, really hope that people will go and find it if they have not seen it, because I really do think that it is worth your time to see this movie. It is a great movie, great performances, and maybe it will have an impact on you like it had on me.
So thanks to Matt for doing that. He's our first somewhat guest here on the A24 Project. So thanks for Matt for coming on, and be sure to check out his shows I Will Post and Aggressive Negotiations. So yeah, it was for him that kind of inspired me to check it out. And I remember the first time I watched it, I was kind of like, oh, this is okay. It's nothing too spectacular, pardon the pun. But when I kind of rewatched it again for this, I was actually enjoyed it a lot more. And I've really quite liked Miles Teller over the past few years, that he plays an asshole, for better or worse, incredibly well. And he's someone that you don't find yourself rooting against. You find himself rooting for, even when he's being a bit of an ass. I don't know what that says about me as a male, or someone watching his characters, or whether or the writing of films like this or Whiplash, for example. Less so Fantastic Four, but you know, he's such a great, he is the, you know, the asshole's asshole in some of these movies, but it's coming from a place of vulnerability. It's coming from a place of fear, and especially in this kind of film, as that kind of side of himself looks to sabotage and protect himself from kind of pain and suffering and history repeating itself.
You know, absolutely. I think I agree with you. I was about to put in, but you took the word out of my mouth, which was vulnerability. I mean, he's incredibly vulnerable in this. He's basically, the drinking and the sort of behavior is basically him building up this wall to stop himself from being hurt. You know, he's at the beginning of the movie, he's dumped by his girlfriend, and he immediately finds another relationship with someone who is a bit meeker than him and whatever, so he can potentially sort of dominate that. But you sort of discover that he is incredibly vulnerable and weak, especially regarding his parents. You know, his dad, you know, his mother has said that his dad left town, you know, basically abandoned him and stuff like that. But we discover that as he manages to surreptitiously get his details and goes to see him, that really his mother was protecting him, because his father is essentially a bigger asshole than he is. So, I mean, again, I should say, but I guess with all these sort of podcasts, you know, spoiler warning, you know, because these films have been out for a while, we will be sort of deep diving into a lot of the content of them. So hopefully you have seen Spectacular now before listening to this, but yeah, just to remind people that we will be talking spoilers.
Especially before we dive into anime, for example.
Oh, so, absolutely, yes.
And I think what attracted me sort of first to kind of this film when I did see it, you know, apart from kind of Matt Rushing's recommendation, was you know, the addition of Shailene Woodley. I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong, but I was so impressed with her in Alexander Payne's Descendants. So to see her in something again was really quite exciting. And I'd kind of read up that she'd been kind of offered some of these movies and parts, and she just wasn't that impressed with them, or wasn't blown away with them. And you know, The Spectacular now came across her kind of desk, and it was something that she kind of leapt at. And you know, she certainly has a challenging role kind of as Amy in this film, because she's perhaps not the most exciting of characters. She's, you know, traditionally in sort of these movies, you know, someone like Amy is this kind of very vanilla Christian style character, whereas in this she's just kind of a normal person. She's not an extreme personality, or someone that's deeply devoted into their faith is why they're perhaps that way. She's just a normal person, that person that we pass by all the time in the street, or we know at work, or we all know too well at school. You know, she's got a really difficult role of being someone that's quite plain and friendly and nice, but someone that can go and you know, fill a space with someone like kind of Miles Teller, who has such a strong personality. He's very dominating, you know, in terms of personality, and I think they go together really well. And I think she does a fantastic kind of role as this, especially as Amy. She's someone that you're rooting for as well. You don't have a bad word to say about her.
I totally agree, and yeah, she is fantastic. And what I liked about this film is that there was never any attempt to change her. You know, a lot of these films, you know, Miles Teller would be trying to make her more popular or more attractive, or that kind of, you know, the she's all that sort of storyline. But, you know, these are two people who are on their paths. You know, she knows exactly what she wants to be. She's going to college. That's absolutely what she wants to do. Miles Teller's character is living in the now. He's not even thinking about the future. And they meet at this point, and they have, you know, a spectacular moment, but you can kind of sense that their paths will, again, pardon the potential pun, but diverge, become divergent later on, and you're just waiting for you kind of sense that something is coming, and it is sad to see them what happens at the end. But again, there is always that sort of potential moment for reconciliation or hope and stuff like that. And one of my favorite moments in the film is at the end. Bob Odenkirk's character is this store manager where Miles Teller works, and basically saying that he can only keep one person on, and he needs an assurance from Miles Teller that he's not going to come in hungover to work ever again. And he's like, Miles Teller says, "I can't give you that promise. Me, I can't." And he's like, "Well, I appreciate your honesty." And basically, that's Miles Teller's accepted utterly who his character is. And I always find it weird with these sort of American high school movies is trying to determine what age these people are, because he does a hell of a lot of drinking. I mean, is he meant to be sort of 18, or is he meant to be around 21, the sort of legal drinking age? Because I can never remember how old the kids are at that sort of high school age when they're meant to be. Because, I mean, the amount of drinking he does is obscene, and how he can actually function at times is just bizarre. But yeah, it's always one thing which has always confused me about the ages of high school kids about.
Yeah, I think American high school kids are so different to us. And when I was kind of watching the film, I said to my girlfriend, I was like, their obsession with like sports, for example, and how they define sort of their high school, it seems to be very kind of driven by things like that and huge parties. It just seems unrecognizable to people like us. And yeah, I think Miles Teller is the same age as me. He's 31 years old. So when he made this film in 2013, he would have been 25. So playing probably an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, something like that, I would imagine.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, like you say, I mean, there's the parties and stuff like that. But what another refreshing thing was there never seemed to be like an over reliance on shoehorning in a specific soundtrack that would sort of potentially date the movie. In terms of using popular bands and stuff like that. There was music in it, but it was never sort of on the way like, say, like an American Pie would use music and sort of big sort of pop songs from the bands of the time and stuff like that. It never relied on that in order to tell the story. It was all down to sort of the characters and the situations and the dialogue and stuff like that.
And I think one thing I really liked about this as well is like the cast as well. Like they've really brought together a great cast, and they're in quite small roles as well. So, it's not like these people are, being offered some of the biggest roles. But it seems that there's something in that script that's really attracted them. I mean, Mary Elizabeth Winstead is our first A24 actor to appear twice after she appeared in Charles Swan. So she's already improving in this capacity.
I was wondering if we needed to start a tally to find out as we go through all the films who is the A24's most consistent performer, because Brie Larson's in this, and then we've got Room coming up, so it's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top in terms of who's done the most A24 films.
Absolutely. I mean, even someone like Bob Odenkirk, I mean, we all know he's such a big name to us now, but at the time he wasn't that big an actor, he was, I think this was just as kind of Breaking Bad was probably just about to take off for him, and he'd been in sort of small roles here and there. To see him in a role like this where it's just he's a shop owner, it's probably a couple of days work. Kyle Chandler was brilliant in such a small role as Tommy as well. You those kind of few scenes really kind of show why Sutter is the man that he is and why he has turned to drink, and you can almost believe the meltdown that he has following that kind of meeting with his dad, which kind of leads to a bit of a shocking twist as well. So I think Kyle Chandler's great. Brie Larson, it's one of these ones, it's such a throwback to remember that we think of her such this big name, this Oscar winner, only a year or two, but even before then she was still in small roles like this. She wasn't Scott Pilgrim, for example, as well. So it's really exciting to see how far this cast has come as well. Obviously Jennifer Jason Leigh as well. It's a fantastic supporting cast. Is as good as anything that we've seen to date so far.
100% agree. Yeah, the supporting cast is what sort of elevates this film again from potentially something like that we have seen 100 million times before into something, like you say, sort of potentially spectacular. And yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the quality of the script and the strength of the screenwriting, because yeah, it is. It's a film, like, I think it's same as you. When I watched it on my initial viewing, I wasn't blown away, and on rewatching it for this podcast, I find myself more invested in liking it a lot more. So it's something that's certainly improved on a second viewing for me.
Yeah, definitely, and likewise, I think it's well worth a watch. And I think 500 Days of Summer seems to be so many people's favorite movie, or a film that was perhaps a gateway to them for sort of different kind of cinema. That was a film that I was never particularly fond of, but whereas they weren't very relatable kind of younger characters. Whereas these ones, I've seen a Sutter, I've seen an Amy, a Cassidy. These characters are somewhat relatable to an extent, and it feels like a very low key, simple story, and it's done really well. And that's kind of our fourth kind of coming of age A24 movie in a row. So it's certainly been an interesting kind of series. We've gone from something like Ginger and Rosa, the anxiety of the Cold War, and then kind of 4 movies later, here we are, where it's the anxiety and stress of repeating the mistakes of a father, really. So it's been an interesting kind of 4 movies in a row, and it's quite exciting that they picked those movies when they were looking to break out.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of history potentially repeating itself, it's certainly a plot device that figures quite heavily in potentially our next film, if we're ready to talk about Enemy. Are you?
I think so. Oh yes, I absolutely am, and Enemy is one I'm really excited to speak about. I mean, this is why I wanted to do this project together, because in one episode we can discuss a coming of age, very low key movie like The Spectacular Now, and then we can go from that to a Denis Villeneuve movie called Enemy, which is potentially one of my favorite films I've kind of seen in cinemas in terms of experience. And for those that aren't familiar with Enemy, maybe you know of Dennis from his work on things like Sicario, Blade Runner 2049. This is the story. It's loosely based on a 2002 novel called The Double, but Jake Gyllenhaal plays Adam Bell, a Toronto area history college professor. He's a rather somber man, largely because he's stuck in routine, which includes a relationship with his living girlfriend Mary. While watching a rental movie, he spots an actor in a bit part that looks exactly like him, and he becomes obsessed with finding out about this double of his. He learns that the actor's stage name is Daniel St. Clair, whose legal name is Anthony Clair. And Clair is a Toronto-based actor with a few on-screen parts and is married to a woman named Helen, who is several months pregnant. Adam then becomes obsessed with meeting Claire, who he learns upon first sighting that they look exactly the same, from facial hair to the scars they have. But Claire, who is outwardly more put together than Adam, and their lives become intertwined as Claire herself ends up becoming obsessed with Adam, but in a very slightly different way. So obviously we don't put much faith in obviously these Rotten Tomato things, but they're always an interesting kind of point of reference. And for this, it's got a 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, but dare I suggest this could be our favourite A24 movie to date. It's obviously Under the Skin's next, but I think this could be my favourite so far. And would I be right in assuming that could be the same for you too, Dels?
You are correct. For me, this is the best A24 production so far. And yeah, for me, this was the second film that I'd seen of Denis Villeneuve. You call him Dennis, I call him Denis. We're like that. But this was released after Prisoners, although I believe it was potentially filmed before Prisoners, the second film that Denis made with Jake Gyllenhaal in lead role. And for me, Denis Villeneuve is the best filmmaker working today. From Prisoners, Enemy, Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, they are all for me 5-star films. Absolutely 100%. And this was one of 2 films, I think, that came out that year or around about that time that were based on The Double. I don't know how they did in America, but over here, I think that this one was maybe slightly overshadowed by Richard Ayoade's The Double, starring Jesse Eisenberg. It was, I think, more faithful to the sort of the books, whereas this one is sort of more potentially sort of inspired by. But this is one that I was definitely sort of looking forward to talking. And spoiler warning, absolutely, I want to deep dive into what this film is about and the ending of the film. I want to have conversations because I've never really had the opportunity to have a deep conversation about this film, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, what was your first take when you saw it?
I don't know why I kind of got around to seeing it. I remember I went to see it at the Film House Cinema, and I remembered it was the quad poster where it's kind of the mirror images of Jake Gyllenhaal's head, and on top of it it's got the Toronto skyline with these spider-like creatures on, and it was kind of like, that seems interesting. I'll have to check it out. And I now own that quad poster on, and I've had it displayed on my wall here and there. It's been taken down and replaced by something else that my girlfriend finds a bit more palatable. But yeah, I went to see it, and I was so blown away by it. It was one of these films where you're watching, and it's got such a mystery. It's got a real mood and vibe to it. It feels like you're watching a vision of a director. I mean, this is someone that was only kind of really kind of starting off. We were starting to get his kind of films in, and I love Jake Gyllenhaal. And I remembered kind of getting to the end, and I'll leave that to you to describe. But there's something happens, and I'm like, huh, in a really excited way, where I'm like, I cannot wait to get home and read up on this, because it wasn't one of these films where I could go home and watch it again, or I could download it on a Netflix. I had to kind of make do with like, well, I'll see this movie again at some point. And I kind of went onto YouTube, and it had been out in America for a good few months by that point. So there was these videos of like the ending of Enemy Explained, what you missed when you were watching Enemy. And I just spent the rest of my evening watching these videos, listening to people that had perhaps seen it a couple of times, were able to articulate things that even I never picked up on. It was so exciting. And yeah, it's definitely one of the most unforgettable endings I've ever seen. And I think it's one that, inspires so much debate and discussion, and I'm really curious to hear your take on that famous ending.
Yeah, so I mean, as we said, we're going into spoilers, so I think it's fair to be able to describe the ending. And it's like you say, for me, it's one of the most unforgettable endings in cinema history. And maybe not potentially for what you see, but the sound effect has been burned into my brain. I will never be able to forget that noise that happens when, and here we go into spoiler territory, Jake Gyllenhaal tells his pregnant wife that he's going out, and then she doesn't answer him, so he goes into the bedroom to find that there is not his wife, but instead a giant spider which sort of scuttles back against the wall. And then he's sort of looking at it and sort of has this weird, ever so slightly creepy, slight smile. And then the film ends. And you're going, huh? And full context, I mean, there is a lot of spider-type metaphors throughout the film. One of the first scenes features Jake Gyllenhaal going to some sort of strange underground sex dungeon where women stand on spiders with stiletto heels, and then there's a shot of a semi-naked woman walking down a corridor at one point with a spider's head. There's giant spiders that sort of walk across the city at certain times. There's sort of images of sort of spider webs can be seen in broken glass and stuff like this. And initially I was thinking that there was some strange sort of body snatcher type thing where spiders were taking over human beings, and they were living in this sort of strange alternative world. But sort of now, sort of rewatching it and stuff like that, I've now got a different interpretation of what happens. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what it all means.
I'm still not too sure kind of what it all means. I'm still trying to... I've watched the movie this was my third time watching it, and part of the reason I've never kind of rewatched it maybe more than my love for this film is because that first time watching it was kind of so special. And sometimes I worry that if I watch a movie again, I'll start viewing it of like putting under a microscope, right? Oh, what did this mean? What did that mean? And I almost kind of try and think about how special that kind of first screening was. And when I kind of saw it again, it was on sort of DVD, and then yesterday I watched it again before doing this one. And I kind of changed my mind sort of here and there. And in the first one, I was kind of caught up in the mystery. Like, I was taking it sort of at face value that these were two people that were looked alike. I wasn't too sure why, but I expected it would all be revealed by the end. That's not that type of movie. And then in the second time I watched it, I had all these different sort of YouTube videos, think pieces, blog posts in my head about this means this means that. And a lot of them contradicted and clashed with each other, and I was kind of pulling all different sides apart. Kind of in this one, I was imagining that, are they even the same people? Are these people actually meeting an individual, or is it something like history repeating itself? Which when the Adam character is talking about his experiences at the beginning, where he's like, history repeats itself in kind of class. The first time it's a tragedy, the second time it's a farce. Is Adam actually Anthony, and he's off to repeat the failures of him as they sort of swap these lives over, and this kind of somber meek guy actually becomes sort of this celebrity style character, and as we see, he gets that key at the end that can give him access to that kind of sex club. Is he about to kind of repeat the same mistakes? And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at the movie. But hey, it could change the second time I go see it, the fourth time I see it. What about for yourself? Where are you at with it?
At the moment, I am at the situation where I believe Adam and Anthony are the same person. And at the beginning of the film, the guy in the sex dungeon is Anthony. It's hinted at in conversations with his wife that he has cheated on her in the past. And there's a moment where Adam is hunting down Anthony and goes to the talent agency office, and the security guard says, he hasn't seen him in 6 months. And his wife is 6 months pregnant, and the mother character says, you need to give up this ridiculous idea of becoming a second-rate actor. So I believe that Adam is Anthony's day job of trying to be a history professor in order to earn money while he's doing acting on the side. But Adam is also the sort of meek sort of character who sort of is not Anthony. So Anthony's the one that has affairs, but Adam is the sort of more homely sort of character who, in the scenes where Adam is interacting with the wife seems to like Adam a lot more than Anthony, who she knows has cheated on in the past. And it's about, like you say, there's this quote that, where Marx is saying the first time is tragedy, second time is farce. He's made these mistakes, and at the end it seems that Adam has won out. There's the scenes where Anthony is having the affair. He sort of takes Melanie Laurent's character to this hotel, and then she gets upset when she finds out that he was married, and then they sort of have this car crash. But at that moment, it's sort of, on seeing it again, it seems that is happening inside Adam's head, and Adam's personality wins out at that point. But at the end, when he finds the key, that temptation, it's this sort of representation of temptation and stuff like that. He's probably going to go back to his old ways, and so that's where this is the second time that it's a farce. It's tragic that he's hurt his wife and all this stuff happened, but to do it again is just stupid. And it seems that there will always be this constant battle in his head between these two sort of personalities, and that's my take on it, I think.
Yeah, I can 100% buy into that one. And so here's the question. Obviously, one of the big images in the movies are these spiders we see, kind of like the power lines above the characters almost look like the spiders. We see these spider-like characters kind of hovering over the city, and then obviously one of the final shots of the film is this spider looking terrified where once a pregnant woman sat. What do you think the spiders are, or what do they represent to you?
What I believe them to be, and then this is not in my personal opinion of how the women should be seen, but in Jake Gyllenhaal's character's minds, spiders, women are spiders who catch men in their webs, and he is struggling to escape what he feels, with the wife being pregnant and stuff like that. He is in a situation that he wants to escape from, which is why he then creates this alternative personality. He's got this double life. He's going to these sex dungeons and seeing women crushing spiders and stuff like that. So for him, it represents a world and sort of characters that he wants to escape from, and he's caught in this web and he doesn't know what to do, and he's looking for a way out. And that's what I see. What do you think?
I think they kind of represent sort of kind of women, really, to an extent. And I think when I was watching it this first time, of when they sort of appear, and I think one of the first appearances after the conversation with his mother, where he receives a bit of a dressing down, we kind of see the spider. After they have the car crash where she's challenged him on his kind of toxic masculinity, and they're having a real argument. We see sort of a spider imagery on the car, and then as he is at the end about to go to this sex club, he goes into that room, and he's going to repeat that sort of behavior again, and then we see the spider. And it's not a spider that's threatening or looking to attack, but it's a spider that looks terrified. It's it's in the corner. It's scared of this Jake Gyllenhaal character. So I almost think that these spiders, that represents the fear that women perhaps have of men, and men that are take part in affairs and terrible and toxic behavior.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think it definitely is women, but it was fun. Sort of, you do all this, like you say, you watch these videos and conspiracy theories, and reading on that apparently on IMDb, one of the trivia things was that apparently the cast signed a contract that they were not allowed to discuss the spiders or what they meant during any of their interviews and stuff like that, which I can imagine would be quite frustrating if you're actually trying to interview them about the film. But I guess it's another one of these things that I'm sure, like Freud and whatever, would have a field day with these. I mean, my wife is sort of doing a PhD at the moment. She's into her sort of psychoanalysis and stuff, and like there was sort of every time like they mentioned stuff like Hegel and Marx, she was sort of going, oh, sort of give me a nudge, going, oh, and I was like, I've heard you talking about those ones and stuff. So it's such an interesting film that it's one of those films that you can discuss for hours and hours afterwards, and people can take a number of different opinions on what it's about, and that's when you've got something really, really interesting. You're not going to come out of this film and going, yeah, that was all right. Yeah, it was totally fine. 3 stars. People are going to love this film like we do, or they're going to hate it with a passion, either because they didn't like the filmmaking, or they just didn't understand it and they don't, they just can't get into it. I mean, it's a film you're going to have strong opinions on, and one of the strengths for me on this film is Jake Gyllenhaal's performance. It's 2 performances really, and he was on a roll at this point for me. With Prisoners, he started to show a different side of him, and then just after this, he went on to do Nightcrawler, which for me is still his best performance by a country mile.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these movies that we so often, I think we'll get this with kind of many of the movies in this series, is that there's always deeper things to kind of dive into. That we had something like Spring Breakers a few weeks ago where we spoke about, right, it's this on the level, but what does it mean about this? What does it mean about that? And it's been quite exciting to have movies like this that so often we kind of go to the cinema, and I'm all for just relaxing in the cinema and enjoying a movie, getting taken away with the emotion of a thing. But sometimes when a movie like this comes along, you're so glad that it did, that you can it's been 3-4 years maybe since I saw this in the cinema. And it's like still something I think about and get excited about, and I'll never forget some of those images for a movie that the color palette of the movie is purposely very bland and drab. It's so the imagery and the ideas that it plays with are so big and exciting for a movie that takes place on some highways, in some houses, some flats, apartments. It really is these moments and imagery that really stand out with the film. And you get the odd shot of the kind of the skyline with these big spider creatures just slowly kind of taking over or expanding over. But it's a film that's really kind of set on sort of those kind of small interactions between people, and to make an unforgettable movie out of something like that is something special.
I mean, the color palette is very interesting. It's very sort of almost sort of sandy or beige, and thinking about it, you would not, if you showed these two films, if you showed this film and Scott Pilgrim to someone who wasn't really familiar with the film and told them afterwards both of those films were shot in Toronto, they wouldn't believe you. I mean, what Denis Villeneuve and the cinematographer have done to create this look of a city. I mean, it's clearly set in Toronto. They mentioned it several times, but I mean, the look of it is, I've never really seen anything like it before or since. And I don't know if it's to create this sort of otherworldly sort of dream, sort of escape style thing, but it's just everything about Toronto that if you've ever visited or have seen it in another film like Scott Pilgrim, which is so full of colour and energy. To see that all sort of drained away and replaced with this is quite something.
Yeah, and I think even if you kind of look at his movies to come, something like Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, like movies that have such a interesting uses of colour, and especially something like Blade Runner 2049, obviously something like kind of Richard Deakins always certainly helps, but you would never almost believe, visually that these were the two same directors' vision, but you watch this and you can see the road to something like Blade Runner 2049, Sicario 2 in sort of their views of masculinity, their views of perhaps a man alone trying to solve a mystery. You can see sort of these elements kind of coming into play, which he'll explore later on in his career as well.
Absolutely. Certainly with this and Blade Runner, there's the question of, questioning one's identity. Who am I? What does it mean to be human? Interacting with the sort of the people around you. There's themes, and Arrival as well. There's a lot of that about how we communicate with people and stuff like that. So yeah, his films, for me, he's a 5-star filmmaker through and through. He hasn't made a bad film yet for me, and I'm really excited to always see what he's going to do next. And apparently, it's going to be June, so he's swapping out the spiders for sandworms now. So
he just seems to be getting bigger and bigger, doesn't he? It's crazy to think something like kind of Prisoners, like that was that first one, and then you get something like this. It's crazy to see how much his kind of filmmaking has exploded really in these past less than a decade with the films that he's made and created. And I think, I can't speak for you. Obviously, you're one of the biggest Blade Runner fans I know. I remember when a Blade Runner 2 was always talked about, I was like, don't want to see it, not interested. Oh, it's going to be from the director of Enemy. Oh my God, you have my money. Here's the cash right now. It's amazing how something just like a name like that can give you so much faith in a project like this.
I was actually the same. I have no desire to see a Blade Runner sequel. The original's perfect. Leave it alone. We don't need to continue that. Oh, hang on, Denis Villeneuve. Oh, yes. No, sign me up. Absolutely, 100%. So, Dune was never a film which I really watch or I'm excited about. I've got no really emotional ties to it. So, I'm interested to see what he does, and hopefully, maybe he could reunite with some of the cast from this film. Jake Gyllenhaal always would watch him in anything, but Melanie Laurent, Sarah Gadon. I'd be interested to see them work with Villeneuve again, because I thought they were both fantastic in this, especially Sarah Gadon.
Absolutely. So have you got any kind of final thoughts on Enemy? I know we could probably go for the next 6 years on discussing this film.
Just that it is a film that everyone should watch. It's, as we say, it's the highlight of the A24 catalogue at this point. And I apologise in advance if anyone has come onto this without having seen Enemy beforehand. We will have spoilt it completely for you, but if you haven't seen it, please do see it. And as always, we'd love to hear what other people have made of it. They might have a completely different take on the film, and we'd be interested to hear what they have to say.
Absolutely, and I think we're continuing with exciting kind of movies when we return in 2 weeks' time. So I'm so happy if people have listened to these first 3 episodes, and I'm so excited for this to kind of go out into the world. Obviously our next 2 movies for those who are going to be watching at home or are going to be looking to rent or stream these movies, we're going to be watching Under the Skin, the Scarlett Johansson movie set in our own Scotland, and the Tom Hardy movie set in a car. Lock. So kind of 2 very diverse movies once again, and I think it's going to be really exciting to see what we think of these in a couple of weeks' time.
This is the episode which I've probably been looking forward to the most since I saw the list. These are two of my favourite films of the last few years, so I'm very excited to get back down in front of the microphone and discuss these, because, again, these are two films, especially Under the Skin, which I think we could debate for a long, long time.
Absolutely, I'm so excited. So yeah, tune in again in 2 weeks' time. So be sure to kind of subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. That'll be the first way to know when the show's out there in 2 weeks' time on your phone. And thanks very much for listening, and be sure to let us know what you think of these movies, and tune in again in a couple weeks' time. So if you're looking to kind of follow the show on the podcast network, check out thenerdparty.com, Twitter at Join Nerd Party, Facebook /The Nerd Party, and you can find us on Instagram at The Nerd Party as well. And Dallas, if people wanted to reach out to you and talk about spiders as women, or double the Jake Gyllenhaal, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at @champcelluloid, or they can find my blog on championshipcelluloid.blogspot.com. And if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. So thank you very much for joining us on day one of the A24 project, and we can't wait to enjoy more diverse and as exciting movies as we go along together. So thanks very much for listening, and see you in a few weeks. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.